Bienvenidos, welcome. Usala Media presents Circle the Wagon, the Youth Vote 2020. Today's event will be moderated by Aisha Richardson and Leslie Acosta. I want to thank the panelists and students for carving out time to participate in this town hall event. I believe the youth vote will be decisive, but the question is, will it be earned? Regardless of your political affiliation, young people need to vote. Thus, this town hall event is about having that conversation and the power of voting. As we all remember, young people registered, organized, and voted in massive numbers in 2008 when Barack Obama was first on the ballot. 66% of young Americans voted for Obama, making up the gap between voters under 30 and over 30 larger than any presidential election since 1972. And ever since, both parties have recognized the importance of the youth vote. The people choose who represents us at every level of government. It is our job to make it clear how we feel about our representation. So guess what? Your voice does matter. When you tweet about gun violence or climate change or a better remote learning experience, those issues are on the ballot November the 3rd. Once again, we would like to thank our panelists, Keva Clark, Coalition Director for the Biden-Harris campaign, Manuel Guzman, State Rep candidate for the PA House and Deputy Coalition Director for the Biden-Harris campaign, Brandon Flood, Secretary, Board of Pardons, Dr. Nina Ahmed, Auditor General, candidate for PA, and Drew Murray, State Rep candidate for PA House. Universities participating, Temple University, Florida International University, Cleveland State University, Central State University, and Northern Michigan University. All 5 of these universities are located directly in battleground states where this election will be decided. Let's begin. Aisha Richardson, thank you for co-hosting this event. Please introduce yourself and provide the rules of engagement.
Thank you so much. Leslie and I have been doing this radio show over the past year, and we're so excited to be able to bring panelists to talk about these really important issues to young people and to our general listening audience. So we've got some rules of engagement. The structure is for the Q&A is that students will introduce themselves and provide their age and school that they're attending. You have 5 minutes per question for the Q&A. So we're going to start with the Florida International University. And I believe the Fernando Ramos and Jocelyn Correa are here to talk about the concerns that Florida State University students have.
Correct.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Correa. I'm a senior currently studying at Florida International University. I'm seeking my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. And today my first one is in regard to healthcare. So my first one would actually be directed towards Mrs. Clark, the Coalition Director from Biden campaign. And my question was, on Joe Biden's campaign website, it is stated that he has a plan to build on the Affordable Care Act by giving Americans more choice, reducing healthcare costs, and making our healthcare system less complex to navigate. My question is, how does the Biden-Harris administration plan on reducing the cost of healthcare and pharmaceuticals with a specific plan?
Who's answering?
That's for Keva Clark.
Yep. Is Keva, she's here. Is she in?
She's muted.
She's
Keva,
muted?
could you unmute yourself, Keva?
Someone has to let her know.
Oh, she's unmuted herself. Great.
There she
Hi,
is.
sorry, I was having some technical difficulties. So while I can't personally speak to the exact policy recommendation that you're asking for, I can speak to the that there is a plan in place to ensure that all Americans have affordable health care, and can refer you back to the plan, or can find a better person to actually answer that question for you. Sorry if since that wasn't helpful.
Um, Moderators, can I address it a little bit as well from a state perspective?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So thank you so much for that question, Jocelyn. I'm Nina Ahmed. I'm running to be the Auditor General of Pennsylvania, and my job is to be the fiscal watchdog to make sure tax dollars that people pay are used with integrity, and we have some transparency and accountability in that. And most importantly, that will allow us to see how equitably those dollars are spent, right? And which communities are getting those dollars, how are we deciding that? And healthcare is a big, big issue, like you mentioned. And I have taken a specific point out of the healthcare, which is the price of prescription drugs in the state of Pennsylvania. All across the country, people are paying way too much for their prescriptions. And part of it is because there's, pharmaceutical companies are unchecked in how they raise their prices. For example, insulin is something that I'm a scientist by training, by the way, biomedical scientist. And so the price of insulin, for example, keeps going up, even though the technology and the science behind it is not changed. So there are very few checks and balances on how these prices are set. In Pennsylvania, there's another entity that adds to the price of our drugs, which is called the Pharmacy Benefits Manager. And that is a third party in the supply chain, meaning when the drug is coming from the pharmaceutical company to the pharmacist, this entity is supposed to be there, get some rebates from the pharmaceutical companies and pass them on to the pharmacists. These are mostly our independent small pharmacists, our small businesses. However, there's no transparency in that. We don't know what they're getting in rebates, what they're passing down. We have no kind of regulation there. So I would like, as the Auditor General, to be able to look at why we spent in the year 2017 close to $3 billion in reimbursing pharmacy benefits managers in the Medicaid space. And one of the reasons, and I'm telling you all this because the devil is always in the details. The reason the Auditor General so far hasn't been able to look into that is because we can only audit direct contractors. And these pharmacy benefits managers are subcontractors. So that is the first thing I would have to work with our governor, work with the legislature to say, Governor, can you make an executive order and make sure we're able to look in there, and then ask the legislature, can you make that a permanent change so we can forever look into that and hold them accountable? So that's just one way I am looking to use my role to make sure our seniors who are on fixed incomes and others who are not able to afford their medicines, because that is penny wise, pound foolish. At the end of the day, we'll have to take care of them through other means, and it's going to cost all of us more. So it makes sense to actually invest early on and make sure we take care of everybody's health, because without health, you can't do anything. So thank you.
So if this is something that we can get done in Pennsylvania, this is something that may be able to be piloted across the country. So, okay, so we're going to go to our next question, which I believe is around climate change.
It's around criminal justice reform from Jocelyn. She has two
Okay,
questions.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. So my second question was, I was curious as to, everyone can basically give their opinion on this. What are the current obstacles right now that we're facing inside of Congress that are preventing us from seeing real criminal justice reform? And what can college students like me and my friends do other than vote? Because at least for me, every single one of my friends I know, we're all registered to vote. We make a big day of it. We all go together. And at this point, we're just kind of frustrated because we don't know how much more we can do if our legislators aren't passing bills and making the laws so that way we see the real reform.
That's correct. Brandon Flood, that question, you can start there.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk. I mean, I guess my response would apply whether we're talking locally or we're talking about on the federal level. I think it comes down to interest ultimately. Even when we look at marijuana or the decriminalization thereof, you still see a great deal of resistance from our congressional leaders because Big Pharma obviously stands to lose. The more states that legalize, the more that folks can be able, especially be able to grow their own plants and source their own marijuana themselves. So, I think it comes down to special interests and, special interests. And to your point about what can be done in terms of advocacy, it's posing those questions very directly, very pointed questions to not only your congressional leaders, but anyone that would have any influence or potentially would have be able to vote on a bill, whether on a local, again, statewide, or on the federal level.
Any other, Drew or anyone else with Manny, would you like to answer that question as well?
Sure, I'll jump in. And number one, I agree. I would also push for the federal or state level or both. Legalization of marijuana. I also think on many cases we give judges too much leeway on sentences. I never think a person should be made an example of, and I think too often you see people who are incarcerated for too long for minor non-violent offenses, and unfortunately, those people oftentimes are people of color, and that's one of the biggest problems. Someone should not be put in jail for a minor offense, specifically a first offense. We put people in jail for too long, and then once people are released from jail, we don't give them the help they need to get back on. And it's a very, I'm a Republican. I might be the only Republican on the panel, but to me, it's a very Republican idea to give people training in jail and help them get back on their feet once they go back to society. Because if we don't help them get back on their feet, they're just going to do the same thing that put them in jail in the first place. So to me, if we help them while they're in jail and we get them back on their feet afterwards, it's actually going to cost less, and it's going to be more fiscally responsible if we can do that. So that would be my number one thing that we need to do as far as the criminal justice system. Help people. Number one, don't incarcerate people for longer than they should be, and we need to help people get back on their feet once they have served their time.
Leslie, may I chime in as well? So from a state perspective, we actually have to look at why there are certain communities that are policed way more than other communities for doing the exact same thing. This is, so you folks are young folks. You're doing, sometimes you make some poor decisions, but when you're doing that in a leafy suburb in someone's basement, no one is coming to check on you. But when you're doing it when you don't have a basement, when you are hanging out on the corner and doing what every teenager is doing, and if you get policed and over-policed, you'll end up incarcerated, and that changes the trajectory of your life. That's a problem right there, over-policing. And that's something that we can look at if there's state dollars going as to what is our police using that money for. Remember, the crimes that impact us the most are white-collar crimes that cause us to lose our jobs. Corporate crime is a big crime. We don't police that at all. That is not in the purview of our police. So we have to look at what do we call crime and that's a big question, right? The second piece is looking at cash bail. When you are just arrested and you don't have money to post bail, you're going to sit in that prison and you're going to lose your job. Can't make your car payments, house payments. Your children will be taken away. Your whole life will disintegrate. Whereas if you're a rich person, you can pay your bail, off you go merrily, doing everything you were doing, and your life stays on track. That is just unjust and unfair, and we need to stop it. And one of the biggest reasons for incarceration is because of violations of parole, minor technical violations of parole. And we need to stop that as well, to look very clearly as what is causing these parole violations and why are they being policed in this manner. But the fundamental issue is prisons make money. They're part of a budget. When we house Philadelphia, I'm from Philadelphia, we house Philadelphia residents in a faraway county. They make money per head of each prisoner. So we have to take that value and put it out in the open and talk about how it is, this incarceration is being driven by dollars and cents in certain places, profiting off particularly Black and brown bodies. So There's a lot of change to happen. But if we talk at a state level, and I go to 67 counties if I'm the Auditor General. I'm not limited by, state where my district is. And I can talk about your dollars and cents going to prop up such unjust and unfair systems. Then you can talk to your legislators, whether they're congressional or local, and say, why aren't we doing something about it? But I will give you the information, so information equals power.
Absolutely.
If I can jump in, just because I would be remiss if I didn't state what our agency is doing to address the issue of the inequities of our criminal justice system. So, Jocelyn, I said about it needs to be a multi-pronged approach, not just directing our attention to Congress, to our state leaders, to our local level, local elected officials, but also our clemency board. So one thing that we did in Pennsylvania that certainly can be done in Florida and elsewhere is we instituted an expedited review program for marijuana specific offenses. So any marijuana specific offense, most notably those that the small possession, which in Pennsylvania is defined as 30 grams or less. When it comes to those kind of offenses, we're fast tracking pardons. They still get review and we still look at the totality of someone's criminal history. But by and large, those small possessions, we are pardoning them on a wholesale level. So that's something that we did unilaterally. And but at the end of the day, we would welcome the legislature to expunge everyone's record or to order us to do so or give us the resources to do it on a broader level. But while we're waiting, again, talking about that multi-pronged approach, we're doing what we can as a clemency board, and certainly that can be replicated in Florida.
Absolutely. We have a video from another student. He was not able to participate, but he did submit a video. His name is Fernando Ramos. He is from also from Florida International University, and this question is being addressed to Ms. Clark. Can we play the video, engineers? Okay, we can't hear him. Okay.
My name is Fernando Ramos. I am a 24-year-old Latino American born and raised in the city of Miami, Florida. Former student and college graduate at Miami-Dade College, and currently a student enrolled at FIU. I want to begin by thanking Usala Media for hosting this event prior to such an important moment in many Americans' lives. Election time is important as it determines what direction the country will be heading in for the next 4 years, and with the implemented policies, laws, and otherwise, sometimes lasting generations. Working 3 jobs currently, I barely find time to keep up with the constant barricade of American politics now hitting the mainstream once again. With everything that has occurred this year, I would like to know why I should put my faith in your candidate, Ms. Clark, for getting this country back on track. Just like the African American vote, the Latino vote is often taken for granted and pandered to, rather than actualized as a real group of voters that are proud of the country they live in and wish for the overall success of its citizens as a whole. I have 3 questions I would like to present and would be honored to receive an honest answer to. On climate change, what is your candidate's plan for controlling the consistent forest fire situation in California? On healthcare, if healthcare will be provided to all, how will this be paid? Will there be a tax increase for the middle class? Will private insurance be allowed in this healthcare reform? And lastly, on criminal justice reform. According to CNN, as of June 2020, New York has had a surge in murder that is 25% higher than last year, in conjunction with shootings being 24% higher than last year as well. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a popular face of the Democratic Party, has commented that the rise in violence is attributed to record unemployment and desperations from citizens trying to feed their families. However, CNN also reports that robbery has gone down since last year. How does unemployment tie into murder and shootings? If it does, wouldn't controlling the economy with a closure due to COVID-19 cause an even further rise in crime, according to Ms. Cortez? If it does not, does your candidate believe that the budget cut of $1 billion to the NYPD is an appropriate solution? Thank you for your time.
Okay, that question is for Ms. Clark.
Hi. So as I said earlier, policy questions, I'm not in a space or position to be able to answer any of the policy related questions, as I'm not a policy expert on this campaign. But from a coalition's perspective, I can say the reason why we should be supporting the vice president is because he supports all of us and not some of us. And as we currently see, we're in a climate where some feel supported and not all feel supported. As it relates to our work in Pennsylvania, you can see within the demographic of those in the electorate that Latinos are at the table and they have an active voice. We have been doing this work not just in this cycle, but in several cycles, and have been improving upon that, and definitely can speak to the testament of having Manny as our Latino outreach director, as well as a candidate on the ballot for this upcoming election. I think it's important that we drive home that the vice president is a candidate for everyone and not just a few of us, and that all of our voices matter, all of our interests are matter, and that it's important that when we think about the type of candidate that we want to represent us in the White House, we want someone that is listening to all of us and not just a few of us.
Okay, Manny, do you want to chime in this question or to answer that question?
Sure. I definitely can chime in. Hello, everyone. Saludos a todos. Buenas tardes. My name is Manuel Manny Guzman. I wear two hats, as Clark just said. I'm a candidate for State House and also the Latino vote director here for the Biden campaign. Today, I'm wearing my candidate hat, and what I will say is that in terms of all of these inequities, we have, I always say we're facing a pandemic on multiple levels, right? So we're facing a coronavirus pandemic. We're facing a racial and social justice pandemic. We're facing a climate change pandemic. And finally, we're facing a poverty pandemic, a deep poverty pandemic within communities that I'm looking to represent here in Reading and across the Commonwealth. And so speaking specifically in terms of what we can do as a legislature and what I'm hoping that Joe Biden will do, is I think it's important for us to remember that Joe Biden is a means to an end, right? And what I mean by that, y'all, is that while Joe Biden may not be the most progressive candidate that we've had for the presidency, not even in this cycle, the one thing I do know about Joe Biden is that he is willing to at least agree with us 95% of the time, right? Whereas Trump and the Trump administration doesn't agree with us, doesn't agree with scientists, doesn't agree with folks that study viruses and know this stuff inside and out, doesn't agree with the economists that tell him that in places like Reading, the place, city that I want to represent, where over 40% of my population lives in deep poverty, right? He's not talking about those issues. And I know that Joe Biden is, and I know that Joe Biden will have people in his corner who can push him a little bit to the left on some of the things that we care about. But quite frankly, as Democrats, as students, as someone who I personally got involved in this political game when I was a sophomore at Kutztown University, as young folks, we need y'all to be the energy that keeps politicians like me and keeps politicians like Nina, Dr. Ahmad, and Brandon and Clark accountable to our progressive vision, right? And so let's remember that, in Pennsylvania and in places like Florida, like there are election cycles every year. And so every year we have an opportunity to elect local progressive candidates who agree with what we want the world to be like. And so I would say that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are a means to an end, and that we need to continue to organize our respective communities. Here in Reading, Pennsylvania, in Florida, we need to continue to organize our communities and elect progressive candidates who believe in the values that we believe in. And once we do that, once we have enough of us in these various positions of government at the federal, state, and local level, we'll definitely start to see a lot of these changes policy-wise that we want to see happen in the world and across the country.
Well, thank you, Manny, for that. Next up, we have Cleveland State University and Central State University from Ohio. So welcome. We have Jenna, and we also have DJ Smith and Jenna Thomas. Jenna, you're up first, and your question is on healthcare, and that's going to be addressed to, I believe, Nina Ahmed. and then the state of politics to Manuel Guzman, and then DJ on education to Keva, and DJ again on gun control to Brandon Plata. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm Jenna. I go to Cleveland State University and I'm 21. For the healthcare question, I'm wondering what policy approaches you can take or see your campaign taking regarding making mental health care more accessible to students in kindergarten through college.
So thank you again. I don't know if you were on the call when I was told who we were. I am running for a statewide office of fiscal responsibility, which is called an auditor general. And my job is to look at how the tax dollars are used for these various reasons, including healthcare. And I can tell you from Pennsylvania's perspective that we don't have mental health care as a part of a package for our entire healthcare. We really have to advocate for that, not just in Pennsylvania, across the country. Because if you break a leg, you go to the doctor, they fix it. If you break your spirit, you have nowhere to go. When you do find someone to go, they don't take your insurance, they take cash. So there's great problems in getting good healthcare as part and parcel of all healthcare. So I think Joe Biden, Keva can reflect on this as well, has made that a policy plank that healthcare is really important, and insurance and whatever healthcare plan we have must cover it, because mental health care is connected to our addiction issues. A lot of people self-medicate, which is why they get addicted, but they're taking care of their own mental pain by doing that. So unless we have a place for people to go and to get proper treatment, you're gonna have this, and that fuels a whole criminal market around illegal drugs. So that's a whole other waste of money happening because we are not giving healthcare to people who need it. The second is, our healthcare providers, our mental healthcare providers have to be put into our healthcare system, just like you go to a general practitioner. We should have a menu of people we can go to. I could tell you a quick personal anecdote. I had someone who was working for me, and I knew she had a mental health care issue. She was very open about it. And one day she called to say she was in a very panicked situation and she couldn't come to work. I said, fine, just take time, go to your doctor. And then she called me back later, like the end of the day, to say how much trouble she had trying to find a doctor to go to. She was going to pay, her father was going to pay for her, and yet she couldn't find anyone. Same thing I've encountered with other people who go into a system, and how we treat our mental health care patients is another travesty. We actually police them. Part of what you see in the incarceration picture is because we don't have healthcare providers. Police are stepping in when there's a problem with someone who's having a mental health care breakdown, right? So these are all from a perspective of an auditor general. This is waste of money because we haven't streamlined our healthcare services. So I will be advocating using research dollars, to look at research to say where the dollars need to go. And hopefully I can share nationally across the board with other folks who are watching the money and saying, are you pushing for this? Are you pushing to have a streamlined set of services for everyone, which includes mental health care? So, I have a young daughter who's just a year younger than you in college, and healthcare and availability, she's far away from home, when she was in college. Now, because of the pandemic, she's not, but right at the pandemic was a need for people to get healthcare, just even if they didn't have a mental health affliction as such, but the stress they were feeling, how they were going to handle everything. There was no place to go. The school counselor was overburdened. So we need to have healthcare at every level, including our secondary schools, our high schools, our colleges, and then of course in general healthcare. So I'm a deep advocate for that because that'll save us lots of money.
Okay. DJ Smith, your question on gun control.
Hello, my name is Jamin Smith. I attend Central State University and I'm a senior. My question on the topic of gun control is, do you believe it is absolutely necessary for civilians to own semi-automatic assault weapons for their protection? And why not allow civilians to have access to rubber bullets or weapons that are less fatal?
Okay, who wants to take a stab at that panel?
Yeah, I will. So, a two-part question. You talked about assault rifles. Should they be essentially permissible in general circulation. I mean, the question is, so you hear that question is you can approach that from two different perspectives: the firearm itself, the capacity size, the capacity, and then the magazine side. I know there are proponents nationally as well as statewide that are calling for limited magazine size, right? So one shouldn't be able to purchase a 50-round clip or a drum clip, especially for such a high power weapon. So whether limiting it to 10 or less magazines to 10 or less, you know. So me personally, I'm a freedom guy. I'm also a Second Amendment proponent. You know, for those that aren't familiar with my story, I've recently, as of last year, received a pardon from our governor, which fully restored all of my civil rights and allowed me to lawfully purchase and own a firearm. So certainly that's a right that I have invoked since that time. And I think, you know, we talk about responsible gun ownership. You know, we often don't hear much conversation about responsible gun ownership in Black and Brown communities, only when we talk about gun violence, right? We don't talk about, that's the only context we hear that question. And so I think certainly those high power weapons definitely need to be more regulated than your regular pistol. But by the same token, I am, again, I talked about being a Second Amendment proponent, and, you know, it should be about responsible gun ownership first. And if, you know, you explore that avenue, and if you're not able to curb behavior or curb the proliferation of illegal firearms or straw purchases, then we have no choice but to further regulate. So I'm kind of on both sides of that argument, personally.
Okay. Jenna, you had another question?
Oh, before you go there, Leslie, could I chime in on the gun control issue?
Go ahead, Nina.
And that really was from the perspective of what Brandon just said about responsible gun ownership. In our state, when somebody is sold from a legal shop a gun, a long gun, we can't keep any information on. 72 hours, we have to destroy information about what that purchase was. For the other guns, we can only keep very specific information, nothing about the ownership, so that if someone lost a gun and they were to report it, there was no database to say, here was the gun, this was the person who owned it, this is where it got lost, this is where we're seeing it show up, because we should participate in the ballistic database that tracks the bullet casing used in those guns. There's lots of ways technologically we could use right now, just today, to actually rein in illegal use of these guns, right? People who are responsible gun owners should not be hampered by all of this, but right now we're just going to go the other end because we're not using available tools. So I would change, our state legislature should change what the rules are around keeping records, just data to know where things are, and also participating in the National Ballistic Database, which actually tracks the bullet casing. That is not foolproof, but if you add it to other evidence, we can actually track a gun, where it was used in particular area, instead of, you know, harassing everybody who fits some kind of broad profile. So we need to have much more specific tools to address this. And I think nationally, we need to have a conversation around that. So thank you.
Okay. DJ, you also, and Jenna, you have one more question. DJ, you had a question on education, and this is going to be addressed Drew Murray to answer this question.
Yes. So the question is, do you feel standardized testing is the best way to assess true learning? And if not, what could be done to rectify that?
Drew Murray.
So that is a challenging question. Should it be the number one determinant of a student, for example, going to college? No, because there are so many different ways to learn. And the number one tool a college should use, for example, I'm going to use college as an example, are students' grade. But is it part of the tool that is needed? I do believe it is, because there needs to be some, you know, constant that colleges have the ability to look at, because some schools are harder than other schools, so they need some level playing ground to kind of determine that. But standardized testing should be, very low on that. It should be grade first. It should be extracurricular activities. What is the student doing outside of the classroom? That's a big factor in someone's experience. Whether that is someone like me who played football through in high school, or if it's someone who plays an instrument, or if it is someone who is on the newspaper. Those extracurricular activities are paramount to really understand what a student is doing. So is it important? Do we need them? Yes, I think we need them to a degree, but it should not be the number one determinant. It should be pretty far down the list.
Hey, Leslie.
Okay.
If I
Jenna,
could
you
jump
had
in
one
there,
more question.
I
Yep.
would love to jump in on
Go
that.
ahead. Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead, guys.
One thing, we oftentimes, when it comes to that question about standardized testing, while certainly tests are a good metric to measure, educational aptitude. I think one thing that we also have to be mindful of, and as in an area that our agency is looking at, is environments, right? So it's one thing to say testing may be culturally biased. But it's another thing when it comes down to instruction, the environment that someone's in, and that the very person who is charged with providing that instruction. Oftentimes, especially when we talk about schools in our Black and Brown communities in our inner cities, typically don't have Black and Brown teachers, in particular Black and Brown men. And there's an upcoming forum that's going to be held on. And it's a former judge, Commonwealth Judge Doris Smith Ribner, is having a conference around trying to get more Black and Brown folks into teaching and to find out where the bottlenecks are. And one area in particular where we talked about males, Black and Brown males, not being disproportionately underrepresented, has to do with criminal records, right? The certification process, who's being screened out. So you may have folks that have the best of intentions and whose passion lies in the educational sector, but can't pursue or at least become certified as teachers because of criminal records. So that's one thing that we're looking at within the context of Pennsylvania, to find out how prevalent of an issue is it that folks are being screened out because of those convictions, and obviously be able to find some workaround to be able to ensure that those that don't pose a risk to public safety or to our children, but who otherwise are qualified to provide instruction to our youth and our young people, that they're afforded that opportunity. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Manny, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I definitely do. In my former life, I was a Reading school board member. That was the first elective office that I ran for. I was fresh out of college. And so for me, the education here in the Commonwealth, especially in my hometown of Reading, if you don't know about Reading, Reading has one of the most underfunded school systems literally in the entire country, right? And so that's at the basis of all of this, right? Is that, we put a lot of pressure on our teachers, and sometimes we give our teachers, excuse my French, the shit end of the stick, right? Where we tie public school teachers' pay and their bonuses compared to how poor students in brown and Black communities like Reading perform on standardized tests. And quite frankly, as somebody who went through a public school system, the Reading School District, I can tell you that I was never a good test taker. And I hated the PSSAs and the Keystone exams, because I knew that I wasn't, my mentality in terms of my educational model wasn't attuned to taking tests. So I think in Pennsylvania, we really, and coronavirus has really shown a bright light on the need for educational reform here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I really believe we got to rethink our entire educational model, quite frankly, because the truth of the matter is that research shows that, brown and Black kids lose, 3 months worth of schooling in the summer months, right? And so with the advent of the internet and the huge digital divide that we see in cities like Reading and cities like Philadelphia, right? In order for us to address the needs of post-coronavirus, and I'm hopeful that we're able to get out of this dark era of our history, right? But the needs of that post-recovery needs to be focused on the most marginalized among us, right? And so, like, when we're talking about standardized testing, when we're talking about education in brown and black cities like Reading, right? We need to think about a model that encompasses that learning is a 365-day activity, right? And so I think a part of what I'd like to do as a state legislature is bring in that new philosophy that, we shouldn't expect our students to learn everything they need to learn from September to May, right? And so maybe there's something that we can do as other states have done in terms of a hybrid approach where we're learning 365 days a year. And we have students who have access to high-speed internet. And we have students who have access to good quality teachers, right? And so I think in Pennsylvania specifically, we really need to rethink how we educate our kids, specifically in brown and black kids. And finally, we need to put up or shut up, right? The state legislature needs to make sure that no brown or black kid that comes out of the city of Reading falls under the cracks because we're not getting the funding that we need in order to properly educate our kids. That's step one. And then finally, step two, we also have to understand that teachers and school administrators can only control what happens within the four walls of their school districts, right? So when you have kids that are going home, like I was a kid in a single family mom household, where the only meal a day that I was eating was lunch, and I'm going home and I'm not eating again for another 24 hours until lunch the next day, right? These are issues that unfortunately our school districts alone can't tackle, right? So we need mental health services. We need SNAP services. We need to bolster our social safety net services so that people who are at the margins of our society are not falling through the cracks. And I believe that when we start looking at things in a more holistic manner, I think we're going to be able to make the changes that we need within our society and within our Commonwealth. One thing, we can't just focus on one thing and then let all the other things fall by the wayside. If we want to focus on education, then we need to focus on poverty. If we want to focus on decreasing criminal justice and decreasing gun violence in our communities, then we need to provide these communities with the economic opportunities that they need in order to move into the middle class. And so all of these things are possible. We just have to have the courage to do it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Manny. We have to move on. I'll get back to you, Jenna, but I want to introduce Temple University right here from Philadelphia. They're also with us here. From Temple University, we have Allison Silabowski and John Fay with questions to the panel. So welcome, guys. Let's start with Allison, and then we'll go with John.
Hi, I'm Allison Silabowski. I'm a junior at Temple University and I'm 20 years old. So my first question is regards to education for college students. So amidst the pandemic, students have been forced to switch from the traditional learning to an online learning. And because of that, many students, by their university, they're still expected to pay full price tuition. However, a lot of students don't feel we are getting an adequate education because of the online learning. Are there any plans into helping these college students who feel like we're not getting a great education by these universities because of the pandemic?
Who's your question to, Allison? Anyone in particular from the panel?
I mean, anyone can answer. Kava Clark, you could answer. Anyone else, though?
Yeah, real quick. I have a quick answer because this isn't really my area of expertise, but I think certainly your energy and the energy of your fellow students should be directed towards the Board of Trustees for your institution as well as for any academic institution. Certainly, I think you make a great point. The cost of tuition was built in prior to the pandemic, and certainly I think it's an irrefutable point that you're not, that the level of service that it's being provided isn't commensurate with the pay. So just what I would direct you to do and your fellow students would be to definitely take that to the Board of Trustees for your institution and really put the onus on them to account for that.
Leslie,
I'll jump in a little
John
bit,
Fay,
Leslie.
go ahead. Go ahead, John. Yep, go ahead.
I'll go a little bit. I'm a Temple. I definitely I want to answer the question. Here's the challenge, Allison. Most of these schools, their fixed costs are the same. and the variable costs are not going down. So the cost to educate you virtually is really no different. So that is the challenge. So, the first thing I would do is say, how can we get, and even if it's a hybrid model, how can we get college students back in the classroom? And it's tough. Look, you're young. You're either going and meeting each other, in dorm rooms or apartments. You've gotten too close. Places like Temple University tried to go back and they had to pull back, and it's understandable that they had to pull back. So the question is, where does this money come from? There are going to be some universities like University of Pennsylvania that has an endowment that probably should pull from and give students back some of their tuition. But you're absolutely right. You're not getting the same education as if you would if you were sitting in front of a professor and if you were sitting amongst other students. But the challenge is, and specifically somewhere like Temple University, that is a public university, where does that funding come from? For private institutions, they should find a way, and if they do have an endowment, especially like the University of Pennsylvania, they should absolutely give money back to the students. It's a tougher question for the public universities like Temple University and Penn State University to find those funds to get back to the students.
I would say to that, y'all, in 2000, I think it was 2008, I led a protest in Kutztown University against then Governor Corbett's almost $3 billion cuts that he was doing to the PASSHE school systems, which Temple, of course, is a part of the PASSHE institution. And so quite frankly, y'all, I would say y'all have the power to organize and protest. I mean, that's the best way for folks to feel what you're feeling, is to continue to organize, continue to protest, continue to make your voice heard, continue to not allow no for an answer, and continue to have these officials justify to y'all why these costs are the way that they are. I mean, I don't think y'all understand how much power y'all have, right? I mean, like if you would organize a group of 2,000 folks, right, in a COVID safe way, there's no way that the chancellor of Temple University would be able to deny you a meeting, would be able to deny you an audience. And so keep that in mind anytime you're organizing on your campus. There's power in numbers. If you're a singular voice, your voice is very easy to push aside. But if you're showing up with 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people who believe in what you believe in, then it's much more hard. It's much more difficult for people to just push aside your concerns. And as somebody who's dealing with student loans right now, with over $100,000 of student loan debt right now, I can tell you that it's horrible. It's a horrible way of existing when over $500 of my disposable income is going to student loan payments a month. And quite frankly, as a millennial, that has made it much more difficult for me to be able to establish myself, to be able to buy my own house, to be able to buy a car in certain circumstances. So our generation is really going to be the generation that needs to step up in order to get the things that we need to get done for us to move forward in a post-COVID world.
And so for the Temple students, I did put the PASSHE link into the chat, and that's the Pennsylvania State School Higher Education entity. So check it out. If you don't know it, now you know.
And
Thank you, Aisha.
I wanted to chime in about the business model. At the end of the day, these universities unfortunately have become businesses. And a lot of what goes on is real estate building, acquiring real estate and making buildings. And now this paradigm shift is happening where you're getting your education where you don't need a building, right? So there's a lot of factors involved in running a university. And that's where an auditor general can look at the state dollars going and how much of it is going to actual education and how much of it is going to, making bigger and newer buildings that you may or may not need, because there's many factors that go into when you invest in that kind of bricks and mortar. A lot of people profit from that. So there's a profit motive involved in keeping a bricks and mortar school where you're paying the price for it. So I would be definitely looking at how we break it down. And number two, we should make our community colleges free, because for people to actually have to work and go to community college, they have to work about 35 hours to afford a community college, where it's impossible to do both. You're not going to get an education. And if you go to the four-year colleges, it's 70 hours that you have to spend. So when you look at those numbers, we are already handicapping students who might not have somebody to, a mommyship or a daddyship to send them to school. So we need to look at those things if you're going to have an educated, educated youth who can then do jobs on the global market. They can compete, because that brings us dollars back to the state. When you earn, we make revenue. And so if you're best equipped and you have the ability to be educated and compete, it benefits us as a state. So we have to kind of look at the model in a different way. So schools have not become real estate developers, places where they're making stadiums or building big buildings, whether you need them or not. So I would take a good hard look at that as well, in addition to adjusting for the COVID and post-pandemic issues that you're facing.
Okay.
So we have 5 minutes left, Leslie. So as timekeeper, I just want to make sure that we stay on time.
Okay, so our last question is from John Fay. John Fay is a student at Temple University, and he is studying journalism. Go ahead, John.
Hi, everyone. My question is kind of for anybody, but it's more directed at Brendan. I thought that you would be able to give a good answer on this. The Biden-Harris administration seems to want to eliminate the cash bail system involved in the criminal justice system in America. While we all do know some of the pros that would come with eliminating some of that, are there any potential consequences that would come from that? And for the good parts of that, could you expand on that and discuss the benefits of eliminating such a system?
So obviously we know what all of the pros are. I mean, if you're asking me specifically what cons exist, I mean, they're very minimal, and I would challenge anyone to present, that's one thing there's an absence of that. You don't really hear much debate or dialogue where there's hard facts opposing the argument for cash bail, with the exception of, I think, matter of fact, if you go to New York, for instance, New York, there was one case where I believe, and I may be overstating it, the guy had about 50 to 100, I think, like retail thefts, and he just kept getting out because he, at least the narrative that was painted, and no offense to I know you're aspiring journalists, no offense to the media, but it was painted in a way, and obviously, when it comes to our media outlets, sometimes it's about sensationalization, to get clicks. But it was painted in a way that this individual deliberately flouted the law because he knew full and well he'll be right back out. And that's how he netted 100 plus retail thefts. So you have some folks that the argument is made that people will flout the system. They'll be more inclined to engage in criminogenic behavior because they know that prospect of them being incarcerated, is diminished significantly. But I think you can make that argument whether you have bail or not. There's science that undergirds the fact that some people, there's no shaking the fact there's some people that are, I won't say predisposed to crime, but certainly they've been reared in environments that do make them more prone to engage in criminal behavior, to recidivate. But I think at the end of the day, people make mistakes. I'm a prime example of that. There are more people that have redeemable qualities and can be redeemed, who will take advantage of a second chance. And there's fewer folks like the gentleman up in New York that exist. So I think the cons are very few, and the pros are overwhelmingly, compelling.
Aisha?
I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. I know that this is it's a hard time right now, because particularly those of you who are campaigning, you got to talk to your constituents. But we've got this new normal where we're using technology to be able to communicate with each other and communicate issues and ideas. And I do want to thank Kiva for participating and contributing to the conversation, because the Biden campaign has been doing a much better job at engaging people online, but we do need to continue to have these face-to-face interactions so that we can make sure that our young people and the issues that are important to them are pushing the envelope, and as Leslie says, moving the needle on the things that are important to our communities, our collective communities.
Yeah, and we want to thank Brandon Flood, Secretary of the Board of Pardons, Kava Clark, the Coalition Director for the Biden campaign, Manuel Guzman, thank you, excellent PA candidate for State Rep, Dr. Nina Ahmed, Auditor General candidate in Pennsylvania. We want to thank you for carving out time to engage in this important conversation about the vote, especially the youth vote. We want to thank Florida International University, Temple University, Cleveland State University, Central State University, and Northern Michigan, all for their participation. Fernando Ramos, Allison, John Fay, Jenna, Jocelyn Correa, thank you. Thank you for this participation. At the end of the day, what we want you guys to do is go vote. Your vote is important, and the youth vote is going to be very decisive in this election. Any closing statements from any of the panelists?
I can go. Just to quickly finish off. Thank you for having us. I want to say that it's great to see young people asking tough questions, because it is your future we are shaping right now, and we are handing the baton off to you. So I thank you for your interest. Please talk to your friends, your family, your peers to make sure October 19th is the last day to get registered. And then you have to quickly apply for your mail-in ballot if you're going to do it by mail, or if you go in person, find out where your polling station is. Most of the Philadelphia ones have been restored to what they used to be before the pandemic, but use your voice, because people have died for you and me to have the right to vote, literally. If you knew anything about John Lewis, he got beaten on the head, dogs sat on him, all of that happened. And many people like that, people who actually died. For you, at least you and me, particular people, those of us of color here, did not have the vote, did not have the right. Women didn't have it over 100 years ago. So exercise it, use it. Please visit my website, ninaforpa.com, and learn more about me. And I hope we can work together in the future. Thank you so much, Leslie, Aisha, everyone, Usala, for having us.
All right, and Temple University, you got closing remarks?
Yes, I just want to say this has been a very productive conversation, and I want to thank all the guests and the students, the fellow students who participated in this. As we all know, the youth vote is more impactful than ever this election, and an open debate about these issues is going to be very important. So I hope that the conversation continues and that we can discuss these important issues as time goes on. Again, thank you all for participating. It was really nice talking to all of you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Aisha. Thank you, everyone, and go vote. Thank you.
See you guys.
Thank you.